Welcome to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host, and today, I guarantee we have a very interesting conversation and guest with us here in Jacqueline Woods. Now, Jacqueline, there's all kinds of reasons why I think this is going to be a super interesting conversation, but I have to tell you something. Your background is phenomenal, by the way. You're three-time B2B CMO. You've held leadership positions, chief marketing officer positions. I mean, I'm going through here and it's like even chief of go-to-market segmentation for General Electric, leadership positions at Oracle, CMO at IBM. It's just the accolades kind of keep going on. So I'm very pleased that we have this conversation. But when we first met, you said, Steve, there's only one thing that I want to talk about on this podcast. And I'm like, well, okay, what is that, Jacqueline? And you said, it's the lack of execution. It's where all good strategy goes to die. And so we're going to really unpack that today because the best laid plans, if they don't materialize, what good was it, right? And so if we're not thinking about just aligning on the strategy, but aligning on how we execute in the market, then we're going to miss the boat. And so that's really what we're going to be talking about here today. Another fascinating thing is you and I were just talking for a few minutes. You are the daughter of a pastor, your father, and your mother was a principal. And so you grew up in an environment that's really interesting. And a lot of what we're going to talk about and is very important in business and to you, I think probably comes from that background in terms of a kind of a culture, a transparency, accountability. I'm sure those are things that you grew up with in your household. But I'd love to have you explain a little bit more about your background before we get started here.
Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting because I think if you're a PK, which is a preacher's kid, and my father actually passed away in 2008. And as I mentioned, my mother was a teacher and then she became a principal and she's a retired principal. And just, I won't even say I felt like I was in a strict environment. I just felt like I was always in an environment where integrity was core and that I had to be accountable to my family and to my community. And I always knew that someone was going to tell my mother that they saw me doing something. And I remember as a kid, I had gone that my neighbor down the street. And I don't know. I don't think we weren't even in junior high school. We were still in elementary school when pretty much you could ride your bike to the store and do all the things and be gone all day and nobody was worried about you. But my parents always told me that if I was with anyone and they did something wrong, that I would be just as guilty as the person who did something wrong. And that just stuck with me like probably like a fungus or something. So my neighbor friend and we're down the street, we ride our bikes to the store. And this was before everyone had the same store. So this store happened to be called the Lewis store, and it was actually a grocery store. And there was a little liquor store next to it. And we went in there to get the penny candy, the Jolly Ranchers, the Tootsie Rolls, and all of that. And, I buy my little whatever, my 20 cents, I get my little 10 things. I'm happy. And we're riding our bikes and we get to a corner. And then she says, guess what I did? And I'm like, well, what did you do? And she shows me that she has stolen this extra stuff from the store. And I'm like, oh my, I parroted exactly what my parents said, which is I said, my parents told me if I was ever with anybody and they stole something that I was just as guilty, go put it back. I don't care how you put it back. And I'm leaving. And I literally left her and she started riding back to the store. I don't know how, but she put it back. It's like, I'm like riding my bike, like I'm not going to be with a criminal. And she catches up with me and I'm like, you put it back. And she's like, yes, I put it back. And I said, don't ever do that again. Like we can't be friends. And it just, for me, it was about like, this wasn't mine. We didn't earn it. It's like, I'm not going to be with someone who takes something from someone else. And that's kind of how I lived my life, just in terms of, really what are the right things to do, how to be a principled person, how to really have care and empathy for others. And those things are really important to me. And trust is really important. So the fact that if you're someone who I consider to be in my circle, my ability to trust you is important. And I think she learned a pretty valuable lesson that day.
Here's what I want to do. I want to take all of that. I want to translate it because you really live and embody that in your business life and how you operate with teams from the board all the way down inside the organizations. And you said up front, you said in our conversation, execution only works when trust comes first. And I wanted to have you unpack that for us, please.
I often say that the best place I ever worked for execution. So the company that I think has executed the best of everywhere that I've ever worked. And, I don't want people that at other companies to get upset with me, but that was Oracle because he understood what the mission was. It was very clear what Larry wanted us to do, and everyone played their part. And I think when you and I talked, and we talked about execution and accountability, I think I gave the example of a sports team, whether that's a football team, whether it's a basketball team, but what role do you have on the team? And very clearly, each person trusting that the person knows what they're supposed to do. So if I was a football player, my ability to really trust the center if I'm the quarterback, my ability to trust the offensive lineman, and the ability of the offensive lineman to also trust the quarterback that he's calling the right player, that they're calling the right play, that the offensive coordinator is calling the right play. And that offensive coordinator trusting all the players on the field enough so that if something changes on the ground, that they trust the quarterback to call an audible, that they trust the running back when he hears what the quarterback is calling, that he doesn't decide, well, no, I play this position and I need to have the ball. And even if that was the original play that was called, if you read the defense and you see something else, you need to call a different play and to trust that environment enough to know a different play has been called. And because of that, we're all going to play our parts. And when I think about the best place that happened in just the consistent execution just over time was Oracle. Just being able to consistently understand who was on the field, what plays were being called, and we all just leaned into that. And so you didn't have a lot of mistrust because you had people who believed, and I believe that each of those team members had a high degree of trust in one another. And I think that's critically important in order to execute. And I think that if you don't have that, I think is very difficult. I think your execution just probably doesn't go as well.
I love the sports analogy, and you and I are big sports fans. But here's where I want to kind of break that apart and apply it in the business world, right? Because you would never see a wide receiver that a play was called and just decide, I'm going to run a different route. I don't want to do that, right? They wouldn't do that. But it's not like in the business world that we're intentionally running different routes, but we're all smart people. We all reach the levels of leadership that we're at, and we can make decisions and we think they're the right ones. But we got to remember we're all on the same team, on the same playing field. And when we decide to do something different, it impacts everybody else and their expectations, right? What keeps us from operating like a football team? What keeps us from operating like that inside of the business world?
Well, you said something that I think is key. You said a wide receiver would not decide that they are now some other offensive line person. They may have to block for someone else. They may have to do something a little bit different. They see the same goal, which is cross that, line to get a touchdown, crossing the plane, breaking the plane, and getting the score. They all see that and are very intentional about we're all here to do that. That's the only thing that matters. The only thing that matters is getting to the playoffs. The only thing that matters is making it through the playoffs. The only thing that matters is getting to the Super Bowl and having a shot to be a Super Bowl champion. And that every day as a player, I'm thinking about that. And I remember, when I think back, and maybe at the time it kind of, there's a difference between maybe your organization is smaller and maybe it's a little bit larger, than maybe you have a very large organization. When you have the parts that are kind of away from the center, from the brain, I do think there's an attenuation that happens where there's just a signal that's a lower signal. And sometimes it feels like people that are further out, they're actually not getting the signal. And so I do think that communication becomes probably the most important thing. But I would also say communication is difficult. People hear things differently, they learn things differently. Some people are visual, some people they have to hear it, some people are I've got to do it in order for me to be able to execute. And what I think is most important is really understanding each of the types of persons that are on the teams, that you have to try to figure out, how do I get the best out of this person? And how do I make sure that I'm communicating clearly? I think it's always easier when you're winning, right? When you're winning, the person who's calling you the plays is a genius. When you're not winning, it's like, what are they doing? And then you do see people trying to take it into their own hands. And I think it's a very good example that you use. You said you don't see a wide receiver kind of running a different route. Not exactly true. What you do see is a wide receiver tweeting or somehow going on social media talking about that they didn't get the ball or something else is not going well. But what you do know when you see that and you have that observation is you see that kind of friction, and that friction 100% slows down that friction makes it difficult for everyone on the team to try to figure out, like, how do we smooth this out and kind of get back on track and make sure that we're all, for lack of a better term, rowing in the same direction or calling the same play and trying to execute on that play. What I would say is that leadership has a lot to do with it as well. Has the leader been clear about what the strategy is? Is the leader clear on what we're supposed to do? Does everyone respect the leader? The one thing that I would say, where I would use Larry as an example, is Larry was very clear. He was extraordinarily clear. And he was also extraordinarily forgiving. And those are things that you may not see in cultures today. And what I mean about extraordinarily forgiving, he had a habit of really letting us make mistakes so we could course correct. So if we tried something, and at the time I ran all pricing and licensing, and if we priced something and it like just was like a turd, we just fixed it. It's like, that didn't work. No one's buying it at that price. No one's using that metric. That what we thought we could do, we can't do. Just because we spent a fortune building it doesn't mean we can spend a fortune charging for it. And sometimes those things didn't work. And sometimes, again, this goes into, what is your job? What role do you play? And there were oftentimes I had guys in development, they would be like, Jacqueline, I think we could charge this. I'm like, we can't charge that. It's not going to work. And sometimes we would just say, okay, fine. We'll like let this one go and see how it works. Even though with whatever research that myself and my team had done, whatever conversations Safra and I would have had, we would just say, well, we'll see. They feel very insistent. We'll see. Let's try it. And oftentimes, and this is what I mean when you have to let someone who has the expertise do the job, it didn't work. And so that only has to happen once or twice. And then people are like, okay, well, Jacqueline knows what she's doing. And I think that's important. When people have certain experiences where they buy toothpaste or something, they have a perception of how to do a thing, and that thing may be pricing, right? If people have a they've done a little bit of coding, right? They have a perception now that they're somehow the master developer. And it's like, no, we were just practicing in your garage. I feel like I coded a few things. There's no way I'm going to call myself that person. And even having when I was at IBM, I think I had mentioned to you, I had distinguished engineers and senior technical managers that reported to me. I would never call myself a developer. Like I had enough acumen that I could lead someone who was doing these things, but doing them was a different thing. And so it's important to understand what is your role. They trusted me that I knew enough to figure out like what were the solutions that we were going to be building, that we're going to be complementing some other offers that we had, that I knew enough to go figure out how to get the right answer. But it doesn't mean that I was sitting there trying to be leading development. And I think those are opportunities to build trust and expertise, but really understanding what you know and what you don't know and what your limitations are, I think is really important.
I kept thinking over and over again, I'm going to go back to the sports analogy, right? And we all know, because we all came up through marketing, you and I, it's one of the areas that everybody has an opinion on. So you could have the CRO has an opinion, the CEO has an opinion, the CFO has an opinion, COO has an opinion, everybody has an opinion. But on the football team, you typically don't have an offensive lineman coming and telling the wide receiver what to do. There is a mutual respect for the individual roles and the expertise that everyone has developed and the reason why they're on the team to begin with. And what I keep thinking about, you talk about trust, you talk about respect, you talk about communication, right? You talk about how we play together as a team. And you and I put a halo over that. You said it was so important. You talked about the company culture. And tell me what you mean by company culture and why that ultimately impacts execution and growth in what we do.
One, let's start with the first comment that you made. And it's an interesting one. And I think I was talking with a leader, a partner at McKinsey last week. And one of the things that we were talking about was this difficulty or the challenge that I think that marketers just have in general. Because for whatever reason, whether it's many people having an opinion that they think they're a marketer, it really is a discipline. Or I don't know, maybe it's just easy to potentially blame, or where you kind of don't have accountability with the other groups that are responsible for the things that they're responsible for. And the one thing that I had mentioned to you is I said, there was never a time when I was in a meeting with Larry ever. And I don't even remember this happening at IBM, to be honest with you, where there was a one team was used as the excuse for some other team not doing what it was supposed to do. For example, I can't put my shoes on and go outside because you didn't sit the shoes on the floor for me to put them on. And it's like, don't you know where the closet is? I think we all know where the closet is. Not my job to put the shoes in front of the door before you walk out. Like there has to be some self sufficiency here. And that's what I think it means to really have accountability. We are trusting, particularly in technology, we are trusting that the product that we have built is the product that we say it is, that it does what we say it's going to do, that it has the features that we tell people that it has, and that it's going to work the way that it's supposed to work. And even if it didn't, let's say 72% of that is true. And so 28% is kind of like, you're still like me as a marketer. I'm not necessarily blaming the product team. I have to figure out like, what do I have that I can work with in order to put the offer, the solution in the marketplace. And I'm going to really talk about what the attributes are that are the things that people will find useful. And that is what is my job to do. It's my job to try to figure that out. At the same time, the one thing what Larry was good at, the thing that I think, Jenny Remedies was good at, the thing that Arvind's good at, was actually when if the solution or the offer wasn't where it needed to be, holding the team accountable for that. I don't need to do that as a marketer. It's not my job. It's the job of leadership to kind of hold each team accountable for what they're supposed to be accountable for. And it doesn't build trust, I think, at all if any of the people in any of the teams is using the other team as a reason that they are not successful. And one of the things that I truly admired about Larry is that, it didn't matter who the team was, marketing, sales, development, HR, finance, none of us were using any other team for reasons why we weren't successful. If we weren't successful as a company, that was collective lack of success. And when we were successful, it was a collective success. And so we were always just of the mode of trying to figure out what was the part that we play, do our part the best that we can, and how do we help the whole organization. And I think that in and of itself built trust because I do believe that, I mean, you can have a broken product for a year. I mean, but for the most part, I think people were allowed to try to fix the things that they could, and they were given the latitude and the time to do it. And just having that understanding gave people a real opportunity to kind of lean in to solving the problems that were in their remit or under their wheelhouse. And that was just very helpful, quite frankly. And I think any team, when I look at each of the companies that I've worked for, the teams that I've worked with, those are some of the, I think, when teams perform best, everyone feels like they're in it together and they don't feel like they're being whether blamed for success, not when I say blame for success, or blame for things that maybe not be working. And that also when success happens, that the kudos are passed around equally. I think that's just really important.
It's really an interesting observation. We're 26 minutes into our podcast, and every single thing that you're talking about is an internal opportunity or challenge, depending on which way you want to look at it. And every C-suite executive that comes on this podcast, I ask the question, what do you think your top two challenges to creating long-term sustainable growth are? Always the top 3, 4, 5 that are mentioned are internal challenges. Our greatest challenges are us. We love to do our SWOT analysis or look out and say what's happening. And these guys came out with this, and oh my gosh, they're taking the industry by storm. And like you think about challenges, and we kind of tend to think those are probably external, right? But the greatest challenges to our growth in B2B are not external.
I think not having consistency, right? I think not being clear when you don't have clarity, when you don't have consistency. And I also think you have to stick with something long enough for it to turn into something. When it's, new technology, a lot of times, one of the biggest examples that I have is actually has nothing to do with sports, but since I am the analogy queen and I love analogies, I remember just when Justin Bieber was young and coming out when he first came onto the scene. And I think everyone was like, oh my God, he was discovered by us. So this kid is just kind of came out of nowhere. And if you go really do some research on Justin Bieber, you would see a lot of old YouTube things of him playing many instruments. This he had been doing it for years before he was discovered. And somehow even this conversation that we're in right now with AI, somehow people think that this just happened. We have been talking about machine learning and AI for 30 years. And bringing AI to the masses is new, but artificial intelligence unto itself isn't new. We're talking about quantum computing right now as if it's a new thing. When I was at IBM, I had the remit for HPA and HPC, which is high performing analytics and high performing computing. And honestly, that's kind of like the new today's quantum, if you will, of the importance of that. And so even when I think about cloud, before we cloudified it and named it cloud, it was just like we need to have multi tenancy, we need to be able to do these types of things. And then we categorize those things as cloud. And so I say that because often we're looking at something as a oh my God, this is extraordinary. We should all be there at the same time. And most of the time, it is like an iceberg where most of what has happened or most of what you don't see is literally below the surface. And you see this little peak, and everyone is excited about it or saying that they want to do it or saying that they can do it or thinking about, well, why can't I do it? And often, what you find is someone's been working on something for a decade. That's why they're good at it. They didn't just wake up yesterday and decide that this is what they're doing. They've been working on it for a while and they built the infrastructure around it to be successful. Now, if you haven't done that and you're trying to catch up, if you don't have a strong infrastructure yourself to build on that, you can, what I would argue, do rapid prototyping, rapid innovation, and you don't have an environment that allows you to do that. You're not that agile. You're not using agile principles. All of the things that make you be able to develop and do some things faster, you're just probably going to be behind. It doesn't mean you can't catch up. But I think what often happens, we look at the thing that we see and we're amazed by it. I mean, everyone was amazed with that kid when he first came out. But when you kind of go back and you see him doing other things, you're like, oh, you forget that he can play many, many instruments. You forget that he basically was writing music. You forget that he was doing all of those things because we weren't seeing what his preparation was up until that point. And I don't think business is any different. The question is, what has the preparation been up until that point? What has been your discipline around that preparation? What is your discipline to activate what you've been preparing yourself for? And all of those things become very important foundation, blocks to what you need to build on to be successful.
I'm going to ask you probably the hardest question of the entire podcast right here, which is we've covered so much territory here, right? And our poor human brains can only remember about two or three things max at a time. So there are other C-suite, B2B C-suite executives and leaders in organizations that are going to be tuning into this podcast. If there was one staccato statement, if you might say, that you want them to take away, the most important takeaway from our conversation today, what would that be?
I think the most important thing that I would want people to take away is no matter how long I've worked, what keeps coming back to teams being successful is, I think, the culture of the team. Do the persons on the team feel like they belong? Do the people on the team feel like they can be successful? Does everyone believe in the mission that's been assigned, created, put in front of everyone? If in fact you answer yes to all of those things, even if you have an average product, you're going to be successful.
Yeah, it's the team. It's a high performance teams and how you create that environment, that culture for them. I heard somebody say the term psychological safety inside of your team to try new things and fail and try to innovate and work together. But it doesn't mean you have to get it right all the time. And there's a lot of fear of retribution inside teams and companies sometimes. And if I screw up, what's going to happen to me? Right. And that erodes innovation, that erodes teamwork.
I think it erodes. And then the other thing, and I think you and I talked about this, And it's not that I'm, in the beginning when Survivor was on, I think we were all enamored by this kind of social experiment, right? Never like what's going to happen. You throw these people out there, you give them some things, some competitions, and somehow they have to figure out how to get along. And then along the way, they kind of, are eliminating people. And then someone's the quote ultimate survivor. And I remember distinctly, and this was years ago, probably more than 10, where there was the guy who was, I don't know, he was catching the chickens and he was killing the chickens. And somehow he was the thing between people eating and not eating. And I could not understand when they voted this guy off, why they voted this guy off. Because literally, if you really thought you needed to survive and maybe this was like the game, right? Why would you ever get rid of someone who is so critical to the team? And the reason that I bring this up is because the other thing that I would say to any other C suite leader and for people to think about is not everyone is the same. This person was a little bit older. And so this person didn't look like everyone else. And this person was a little bit different. And it was watching, going back to college and watching sometimes things that you see happen in a sorority where it's kind of like a group of people and you've got the popular people and those guys were the ones who were the deciders, for lack of a better term. And I have never forgotten that because I'm sitting there going, you're going to be hungry because you just got rid of the person because you had this little kind of friend group and there were at least one or two people in your friend group who were not contributing to the success of your team. And so to me, really understanding that not everyone's the same, that it's important to really try to work in the differences, accept those differences, be mindful of those differences, and understand how those differences contribute to you being a better team is really important. My only satisfaction is that all those people that voted the guy off, none of those guys won. But, really just really important, and and it just bothered me. And I was younger, like this is like at least a decade ago. And I'm thinking, you're not embracing this person because this person is a little bit older than you. You're not embracing this person. This person has a little bit of quirkiness. You're not embracing this person because they're not sitting around, shooting the bull with you in the way that you like to do it because the other four of you are very similar. And I think it really is really important to kind of look at things and say, I want to see someone who's different because ideas come from all different places. And it's really important that we create space for everyone. So that would be the other thing I would say.
I wish we had a couple of hours because it's such a fascinating conversation. And I know people are going to have questions. Is it appropriate if we give out a link to your LinkedIn profile that people could reach out and ask questions?
Feel free to go to my LinkedIn profile. Feel free to go to my website, JacquelineWoods.com, all one word. Yeah, feel free to reach out to me. This is, Steve, we talked quite a bit, gotten to know each other. And, I love this. I'm very passionate about it. And this has been fun and great to me.
Well, thank you for coming on. And, the mission of this podcast is to take the experiences of the C-suite, which we run our functional roles, but we're also required to lead the direction overall of the business. We're part of the C-suite team that has to look at long-term sustainable growth. And so if we can take different insights and perspectives and experiences from different C-suite roles at different times in different companies and bring it all together and share with each other, then that's like the rising tide that lifts all boats.
Rising tide that lifts all boats for sure.
Absolutely. And you were an amazing part of that rising tide today. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you. It's been wonderful.